Dear guests, the event is now in session. Thank you.
Good morning,
ضيوفنا
everyone.
الأعزاء، ستبدأ الجلسة الآن. شكراً.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your presence today. This conference is part of Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi COP28 program and is a testament to the university's engagement for sustainability and climate change. Today with us, we have Professor Nicole D'Almeida, Professor Emeritus of Universities, who's gonna talk to us about how sustainability and climate are talked about in the media. Professor Nicole D'Almeida, the floor is yours.
Yes, and thank you very much. Good morning to everybody, and very nice to meet you here at Discourse, beautiful space and beautiful event. Well, I'm a professor at Sorbonne University in Paris, but visiting professor here in Abu Dhabi too, and in Brazil and in different countries too. At first, I'd like to thank the organizers and Sorbonne University in Abu Dhabi for this invitation. And through my participation, thank you for giving a place to the social sciences on this topic of climate change, which is mainly treated in a technical, in a economical, in a political way. So giving the human sciences a place invites to understand how the climate issue is something social and invites to adopt a cultural perspective. Climate change is not only a scientific problem or a technological problem we can engineer. It's a human experience, a personal and collective way of life, and a very complex problem with both scientific, cultural, ethical, and philosophical dimensions. The subject of my lecture is very broad, and I will discuss it on the basis of work carried out in France, in Sorbonne, and in different countries with colleagues, with other researchers. So, we are living in usually warm autumn and year, one of the warmest till the next result by meteorological organization which recorded some degrees all over the planet. I think what is interesting is to know how and to understand how a scientific problem, in fact, became a social problem, and this at a large scale. It's interesting too to observe the transformation of a scientific question into a political, into a social and media event. What is happening on this topic is globalization, as much globalization as differentiation of the environmental issue. Media interest has contributed to the acceptance and discussion about the climate change hypothesis, helping to publicize it and to frame it, to shape the issue in the public sphere. Although the work of scientists and politicians is fundamental in publicizing this question, the media system has an important role in the social construction and perception of climate risk through the chosen angle, through the choice of words and images. I define the media as tools, as instruments to connection. The connection with audiences is important and is decisive in this point of view. And I consider media, old or newspaper or social media networks, but also artistic productions as means of expression, as medias, providing information, providing meaning, providing representation of the reality. The climate change has become a public and global issue. A public and, public and global issue. Public in three meanings. Public as a visible problem, public as a discussed problem, and public as a debate and contested issue in a way. The public sphere is, or may be considered as an arena, and the risk of fracture and fragmentation of the public sphere is on this subject very important, very high. And it's an important challenge to maintain and to create the link, to be able to listen and to have empathy and dialogue with the different points of view, with the different visions, to respect them and to be tolerant with them. Eco-activism and radical protest are rising all over the world, and violence sometimes is taking place of the dialogue. Young people, new generation, climate generation, is impatient and has no or very low trust in official policies, institutions, or medias. So a public problem and a global problem in different meanings too. All the countries are facing change threats, climate change, revealing different vulnerabilities such as heat waves, severe storms, wildfire exposures, heavy tree falls, etc., etc. No one is safe. The European Barometer, for example, survey and shows that the European citizens believe that climate change is the single most serious problem facing the world. 93 of people surveyed in Europe consider to be a serious problem, and 78 considering it to be a very serious problem. The public's higher awareness and accurate understanding of climate change is due to increasing political priorities, to greater media attentions, and nowadays to frequent experiences of extreme weather. So there is a change of scale. An ever-growing number of people are concerned and declare themselves concerned by the problem. Numerous heterogeneous players cooperate oppose, inform, denounce, alert, or propose solutions. At least global in the last meaning, many of or all areas are concerned: biodiversity, health, business and economics, land use planning, collective lifestyles, justice, etc., etc. This issue is based on an unstable and controversial vocabulary. I mean here the importance of the naming, how we name the problem. Naming is not neutral. The vocabulary, the words, always contain a dramatic or ideological dimension. Sustainable development, for example, sustainable development is a formula which looks simple or evident, but it's an umbrella term, an umbrella vocabulary, which refers to many different or conflicting interpretations, which contains virtually all the problems of the planet. How can we make compatible social, environmental, and economic aspects, and which are the priorities? The formula sustainability federates as much as it divides, because we live in a world characterized by severe disparities of wealth or power inside the countries and between the countries. The international circulation of the formula sustainability is achieved through a general enrollment of audiences and through the diversification of the points of views. The verbal homogeneity and the virtual international consensus contrasts with the heterogeneity of practices, of choices, and strategies. The formula indicates a global orientation, but stimulates different local interpretations and demands. The globalization on the environmental issue is also at the same time a differentiation, even an opposition. Based on the same vocabulary, discussion becomes negotiations. For example, the question of human responsibility in climate change. Is it collective? Is it global? Is it differentiated? Is it shared? Is it equal? Etc., etc. The debate is very important. We can cite other examples of, for example, eco-concepts, all talking about the nature and talking about the planet, but with very different stakes, with very different presuppositions, representations, and ideologies. For example, wilderness refers to North American vision. The word has a very specific and cultural content created in 19th century in the United States, and inspires, and this vision of wilderness inspires many NGOs. The idea or the vision of nature without human being, without human activities, far away from civilization, and which needs protection. That's the case of wilderness. Other words, Gaia in Europe, Pachama in South America, or Parvati in India, are words which contain a mystical and anthropomorphic dimension and refer to Mother Nature. Anthropocene is the most recent word, vocabulary, created by the Nobel Prize Creighton 20 years ago, and which is nowadays a word widely shared and which offers a new paradigm for human action. Excuse me. It refers to the recent period, 20th century, when human activity began to affect significantly the planet's climate and the ecosystem, creating an irreversible change. A sort of new geological era. The word Anthropocene consecrates and establishes man's role in altering the planet's geological trajectory. But the same word provokes an important debate. When did the Anthropocene begin? Who is responsible? Is it possible to moderate the human geological force? That's questions important. So you understand that the framing is something like a construction, a social construction, and a proposition of meaning which requires specific mediations, which offers visions, which offers narratives, uses specific rhetoric that oscillates between enunciation and denunciation. The question of climate change is framed by several stakeholders, mainly scientific community, institution, communities, but by the media too. Just one point about the scientific framing. Scientific framing. Before the IPCC was set, different scientists have warned and prevent Rachel Carson, Jean Dorst, Barry Commoner, etc., etc. But these were individual initiatives and alerts. Nowadays, the IPCC was established little bit more than 30 years ago, under the auspices of UNEP and the World Meteorological Organization, and publishes regularly its assessment reports, the first one in 1919, and the last one in 2022. IPCC reports have been compiling the most recent and international scientific knowledge for decision makers every 5 or 6 years. What makes IPCC unique and very special is that it's both scientific and political or intergovernmental institution. That's something very new, which combines scientific expertise and information for decision makers. But the reports are policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive, which is something very different. IPCC is a very important or the main source of information on the topic of climate change. The reports of IPCC have a high level of media coverage, which shapes the agenda setting at international level. They are a critical event in the ongoing climate change debate. The problem is to know how can we understand the transition between ecological science, ecological knowledge, and ecological awareness. What is new is the level of intensification and institutionalization of this issue. One word about something quickly about social and institutional framing. There is a double movement of framing, top-down approach and a bottom-up process. Both are complementary but different. International framing is mostly top-down approach, driven by United Nations, by European Union, by the BRICS, with creation of international events, protocols, summits, COPs, sustainable goals, agenda, etc., etc. National impulse is something different. All the countries now have created dedicated ministries since the 70s, more or less. Ministries of environment are created in all the countries. The title of these ministries indicate the scope of their mission and the general environmental orientation of each country. In France, for example, this ministry was created in 1971. It called Ministry of Protection of the Nature. Now it calls Ministry for Ecological Transition, which is something a little bit different. And the first minister in France, in this new minister created at this moment, called this minister the Ministry of the Impossible. The Ministry of the Impossible, because of the size, the oversize of its mission. So with all these ministries is developed public communication on this topic and a general enrollment in communication campaigns, public, private, commercial, corporate, associative communication. Many voices and many players are involved, offering complementary or opposing narratives and images. I think the cultural framing is something interesting because cultural dimension is important in the perception and evaluation of the question of the problem of environment. This cultural dimension is linked to the history and geography of each country. All civilizations and cultures have a historical and specific relation to nature. Romanticism in France, for example, Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th century celebrated the cult of nature against, according to him, the moral damages caused by civilizations. In England, it was in 19th century eugenicism developed in reactions to pollution linked or created by industrial revolution. All these cultures are the background of representations, of values, demands, etc. So I propose to make a focus about this cultural dimension through mediatic system and artistic system. The environmental question in the media, so it's very broad. In its last report, the sixth report, IPCC was emphasizing the role of the media in framing and transmitting information on climate change, and IPCC in this report invites journalists to integrate fully climate issues into their news coverage. As we told, medias are not echo chambers, they are active stakeholders on this topic. They shape and frame the issue in different ways, providing information, expressing opinions, offering commentaries or solutions. These are different aspects of the professions, and usually one or the other aspect dominates and gives to each media, old or new, its specificity. The visibility of the question of environment is not recent, but it's increasing. Air and water issues were already well covered in the newspapers in the 19th century in Europe. The last IPCC report gives interesting information about the media coverage about climate change. It gives some different studies. A study made in 16 countries reveals that 47,000 articles were published in 2016 and 87,000 in 2020. So interesting data. It's increased information is increasing, but maybe not enough. I think that we can give a characteristic about the information, which is characterized by the couple continuity, discontinuity at different levels. The rhythm of information is special on this topic. An intensive rhythm of information at international level during important moments like these COPs, for example, with preparation before, preparation of the agenda, preparation of the positions, of the demands, before, some weeks or some months before, during the event. There is a density of information very, very high and linked, of course, to the event. And then after the event, after the COP, for example, the multiplication of reviews, commentaries, and so on. I imagine the guest journalists, I don't know exactly the number here in Dubai this year. In Paris, when it was in Paris, it was 5,000 journalists are sources of information for the media of their own countries. Continuity and discontinuity in echo with the publication and with the content of IPCC reports. We can observe three main steps linked to the main chapters of these IPCC reports. First, presentations of the facts and scientific elements according to the climate change. Second step, the vulnerabilities of the natural and human systems and the consequences. And third stop, the solutions and the possible scenarios. Reduction of global warming, mitigation, adaptation, resilience, etc., etc. These three steps, in a way, exist one after the other, but one does not replace completely the other. And all over the years, 30 years of publication of IPCC reports, the focus was made on one point or on the other. Actually, the question of solutions is the main question, the main source of information, giving rise to numerous debates, numerous comments or proposals. But the questions of facts, for example, which characterized the first period of information on this topic, this question of fact is now once again very important, linked with the recent extreme climate experience we live during these last months or years. How is the truth? The trust in the media system is generally considered that the main sources or the main institution generating trust are governments, NGOs, businesses, corporates, and media. This point is one or the other actor differs in the different countries. The green journalism began in the 70s, more or less, in Europe. It was at the beginning an underground and local press, a press of struggle with many titles, but with very few and very small audiences in France, as in Germany, as in Europe. The national titles on this topic were the exception; they didn't exist. A professional journalism began at this moment, at the end of the 70s, and with the creation of specialized sections in the print media. The major French national dailies created the rubric, the column environment in this year, 70s. And for example, Le Monde, you know the title, inaugurated its own section on January 72. 30 years later, the rubric Science and Medicine in the daily paper Le Monde became Environment and Sciences, and most recently was created the rubric, or the section, which calls Planet, and which includes health, sciences, climate, environment, etc., etc. Planet. And it's an important service in this paper, Le Monde, with 20 journalists. It's something important, more than economy, for example. It gives an idea. Radio and television at this period too were interested by the subject, and the important point for them was quality of life and health. That they were the main entrances into the environment climate problem or rubric. Today in French public TV, for example, the weather section is not called only weather or meteo, but called meteo climate. So every day, the link between meteo and the climate problem is established and reviewed and commented, etc., etc. The column, or the rubric meteo or weather, often is just before the news, just before the news. So it gives, or it set a tone, a style, which inspires in a way the framing of the news in the news in TV news, for example. And so information in the TV news are often presented as alternates of hot and cold information. Recently, a short declaration for good journalistic practices was created in France in 2022 in order to share good practices. And, for example, the purpose is that ecology shouldn't just be evocated in specialized columns, but in a transversal perspective. The aim is to develop awareness of the importance of images and vocabulary, to invite journalists to use them wisely, to develop low-carbon journalism, to develop training for journalists on environmental issues, to invite them to rigorous investigations and detection of false information, of greenwashing, and other manipulations. About online journalism, online information, the online content on climate change is very diverse. Firstly, this is true regarding the platform or website. Online climate change communication can be found in online news, medias, and their user comments, scientific blogs, discussion forums, political or civil society websites, and social networking sites. The diversity of online communicators is very broad. That's a characteristic. From scientists and lay people to mass media organizations, politicians, corporations, NGOs, etc., etc. Several studies indicate differences in the perception of climate change between the users' online discourse and the users of legacy media. Readers' comments of British and Dutch online newspapers, for example, were found to be mostly climate change skeptical. The hopes and visions of online media supposed to increase the number of interlocutors, the number of discussions, to have a deliberative or democratic potential. This positive vision coexists with disappointments and with practices of disinformation and manipulation. The problem of disinformation on this topic is very important. And some colleagues explain that disinformation is not an accident, but is part and parcel of social media's business model. So they can be considered as a part of orchestrated campaigns with tools like bots, deepfakes, conspiracy theories, etc., etc. A variety of studies consider or pointed out that climate change content on social media is significantly correlated with specific ideological biases or political orientation. What about the sources? Yes, main and preferred sources. The public issue of climate change is based on different main sources: scientific, political, business, and associative sources. There is a plurality, but also a competition in the production of information given to the audiences. Climate scientists, for example, and activists have regularly communicated about the science of human-driven climate change and its impact in interviews, call-in, radio, TV shows, debates, public lectures, new programs, documentaries, etc., etc. Journalistic and national culture. Significant national differences regarding media reporting and public perception exist. In the United States and Great Britain, according to Painter and Ash, for example, the public discourse is polarized and the mass media overemphasizes climate skeptical statements. Boykoff, another researcher, observes how the norm of balance in the American media system contributes to the constant place of sources that question the anthropogenic origins of climate change. Another researcher, who calls Antilia, analyzes the gap between the growing consensus in scientific sphere and the media's work with controversy and uncertainty. Carvalho, another researcher, observing the British media system, analyzes the important role played by environmental organizations as sources and their participation in defining the issue of the media system. At the opposite, according to different German researchers, Germany is exceptional for its strong consensus on the issue of anthropogenic climate change. In the case of Germany, journalists emphasize consensus rather than conflict. They primarily present the scientific arguments of the IPCC reports and trend to exaggerate the certainty of scientific findings. This corresponds with a relatively small segment of German skeptical climate change skeptics. Another researcher, Billiet, has analyzed the case of India through the case of the 4 largest Indian newspapers. And his observation contrasts with the skepticism observed in the Anglo-Saxon press. And the Indian newspapers he analyzes admit climate change as a proven scientific reality. The anthropogenic origin of climate change is recognized and its severe consequences for India. In another hand, they point out, give the accent about the responsibility for the causes and in link with the developed countries. The case of Brazil, another case, is interesting about the use of sources. The environmental issue began in Brazil with concern from Western foreign countries and from indigenous communities about deforestation of the rainforest. The Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit in 1992 was a decisive step in the coverage of the issue. Between 1975 and 2020, government and institutions were in Brazil the main sources of information. It was only after 2000 that NGOs and the scientific community became constant sources of information in Brazil. Quickly now, because, yes, continue. Dramatization of information is something important, something very spectacular. It's a way of selecting the information and to show, to present to the audiences a vision of climate change. We can note the creation of emblematic figures and allegories about a black future, a destroyed and degraded nature. The dramatization of information mobilizes a number of emblematic figures with international dimensions and circulations. They are repeated images that take root in people's mind all over the world and concentrate the force of the climate issue. The Amazon rainforest, considered as the lungs of the planet. The polar bears, the skinny bears, have become the emblem of the reduction of the ice sea and global warmness. Deserts are presented at the horizon for our lives. A new type of refugee, of climate refugees like the inhabitants of Tuvalu, whom Australia decided to welcome every year. So, media have an important role and place in the framing of the climate change issue, but artistic productions too, and I will be on this pens with different stakes. Contemporary art is engaged with this issue. Artistic productions are in this way very interesting because they don't give an abstract idea of climate change, but they give sensitive and affective dimension. Climate art gives to the general public visions and perspective, facilitating the evaluation of the impacts of the crisis. They are sources of ecological ideas, of new ways, new propositions. The stakes and postures are different: alerting, documenting, repairing, becoming one with nature, cooperating with life. That's the case of movie, very quickly. Movie is a very powerful industry and deals with environmental and climate issues all over the world. The power of cinema lies, the power of the movies lies in its ability to create representation, images, and stories that are often spectacular and provoke strong impressions. Another characteristic is the international circulation and the worldwide audiences movies attract. So they are a powerful media for creating and sharing representation, vision, fears, hopes, etc., etc. I have analyzed many movies on this topic, and the main conclusion is the importance of the opposition, of the binaries. Everything is binary. There is a binary rhythm inside these movies, fast and slow. The human speedy business contrasts with the slowness of nature, the noise with the silence. Binary sensations too, hot, cold. Cold, which was traditionally considered as a threat for life, becomes something important, precious, and rare. At the opposite, heat becomes a threat and a danger for life. Binary rhythm, binary sensation, binary colors, the warm colors of the human industry, the red color, the brown color, or the gray and dark colors, are opposed to the bright colors of the nature, white, blue, green, and there is, in Europe, there is a competition between green and blue in this field, and the blue color is rising in a very important way. Binary narratives too in these movies, a common path or movement from a normal situation to a climax, a difficult, very grave, severe situation, then go back to a bearable, reconstructed situation. Stasis, crisis, balance is a general movement of these movies. And at the end, binary status of humankind, on one hand, excess, madness, dark and destructive side, contrasts with the positive side, genius, ability to protect, ability to repair the nature. And at last, in artistic productions, literature is very important, and eco-literature is the main trend today on this topic, and many books, many fictions, climate fictions are created and published, and with very large audiences. Maybe you read one of them. They are characterized by a double bind. In one way, pessimistic and dystopian vision, an anti-pastoral literature focused on disturbances, ruined landscapes, poisoned water, cultural loss, making the world alien, terrifying. And in another way, they give place to imagination, inventions of new ways of life. So anxiety and hope are coexisting in this eco-literature. Ecological art began 50 or 30 years ago. Land's art creation proposed an experience in nature far away from the museum institution, with an inclusive approach opposed to a strictly contemplative and visual frontal relationship. New creations, new places, new ways of working. Show some examples. Yes. Are developing. So these climate artistic productions have two characteristics. They are both dystopian and utopian. That's interesting that dystopia does not exist without utopia. Both dimensions have a moral and didactic perspective. Images of a dystopian future may be considered as real possibilities or threats destined to warn and to provoke action. Look at what might happen if you don't act now. In conclusion, I say that the cultural artistic framework mobilizes moral values, invocation of a common good, political values, principles of justice and solidarity, and aesthetic values, beauty and ugliness, pure and impure. They offer us new ways to look forward, to imagine a fairer world for all, and not only a vision of doom. They conjure up futures where human and non-human lives have been adapted, where new ways of living are reimaginated in the face of environmental disaster. In a way, they are sources of hope and inspirations. They are keys of positive futures. And, okay, the last sentence, I said that, well, important, but the difficulty is neither minimizing the gravity nor succumbing to irrational panic. Thank you for your attention. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, merci. From your experience, what medium of communication and within the media, specifically information, what has had the most impact on action? The point being that
On action.
On action. The point being that there is viewer fatigue, and as you rightly mentioned, there are two ways of informing. One might be too alarming for the public, and the other too hopeful in a certain sense, where you forget about the risks. In your research, have you had information about impact, and what would be the way forward to sensitize people and raise awareness? Thank you.
There are many levels of impact. Sensitive impact is very strong with artistic, with movies, with images. Sensitive impact, awareness impact, something different, which mobilizes information, arguments, scientific data, etc., etc. And for the action, that's the most difficult. I think that exemplarity is the key, and the best way to transmit, to share, to know how to do. So with dialogue, with exchange of experiences, of practices, that's surely the best way. And it supposes human relations. It's not only technical, it's not only... but there are electronic tools, digital tools, for example, to have the measure of footprint impact, for example. That's very useful for every day. But it's not enough. It's not enough. Important is imagination, creation, transmission of experiences, of different experiences, and sharing the experiences. And I think a place like this is a place for that, is a place important, is an important place for this exchange. But transforming the action is something the most difficult, sure, but the most interesting too.
Is there any other question?
Thank you so much for your presentations. My name is Gerasimus Rothatos from the American University in the Emirates. I have actually two questions combined in one for you. Would you suggest that the environmental problem of climate change is overshadowing all the other environmental problems like biodiversity loss, desertification? And the second part of the question, do you think that this also happens with media coverage, that the media is focusing that much on climate change and they don't pay much attention to all the other problems? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your question, which is a very important question, of course. I think it depends on the events, it depends on the moments. Now, a COP, for example, is a moment for climate change, no doubt. But there are other events, other moments are important about oceans, about water, about biodiversity, etc., etc. So what is important is the orchestra, in a way. Do you understand? The orchestra of all the environmental questions, which are very numerous, very different, and with specific audiences, with specific medias, with specific, specific medias. I think the recommendation of the chart, the declaration I was mentioning, is to invite to give transversal information. So to have a vision as large as possible, a treatment as large as possible of these questions, to englober, to insert different aspects, not only climate, not only the problem of air, problem of the earth, the problem of the oceans. Oceans is raising. It was not really a problem 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but since 3 years it's rising. We note it's, for example, something which disappeared was le trou d'ozone, the lack of ozone, le trou d'ozone, the ozone hole. It was an important, very important topic at the end of the 19th. Nowadays, nobody is speaking about it. It's not completely resolved, but problems appear and disappear and complete and are orchestrated or not. That's interesting. It's like in music, sometimes a sound, the guitar, the piano, the different instruments are mobilized.
Any other question?
I'm Farah Al-Hafar, MA Linguistics and MA Development Studies at University for Peace, Costa Rica. I'm more concentrated on the critical discourse analysis of media. And I want to ask you, how important is it to focus on this area and to encourage publication related to trying to analyze those ideologies hidden behind the use of vocabulary in the media, and specifically online media, that are sometimes used as they pretend to be like positive media or like they are encouraging, but if we analyze those vocabulary used, we see that they are not actually encouraging. There is something within or behind these words that are not really encouraging to take actions. So how important do you think is it important to focus our attention to this?
Yes, I think the field of information is really a competition or even a war between different sources which shape, which frame in a different specific way the problem. So it's a problem of power, soft power, but important power on this matter. And the question is, excusez-moi si j'ai bien, there was a specific question or je n'ai pas bien compris s'il y avait une question particulière.
Comment on encourage ce genre de publication? Est-ce qu'il faut encourager ce genre de publication?
Et quel genre?
The critical discourse analysis regarding online media specifically, and how we, because generally publications are focused on media, the formal media, but that's not what we should focus on. We should focus on the online media because they reflect how ordinary people think and how ordinary people interact, or
Yes, yes, that's a problem of online information. I told about the gap and yes, between the hopes about a new media, a democratic, plural, interesting, open, and the reality of it's not only competitions, but disinformation, misinformation, such a variety of points of view, of voices that destroy the trust or threaten the trust in information. I think, yes, regulation of the information on this topic is something important, something important. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much for coming today. We've reached the end of the session. Thank you, Professor Nicole Dalmeida. Thank you. And as it is our last session and we are closing our program today, I would just like to take a moment to thank all the technical team from Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi who has been with me here behind all the sessions. So a special thank you to Amina, who's at another session. A special thank you as well to the Corporate Communication Office. And thank you to Professor Nathalie Martial-Braz, who's the Vice Chancellor of the university, for her support, along with Gwen O'Gorman. I would really like to thank all those people for their invaluable support. And thank you again for coming. Thank you.